Welcome to the show, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Tuesday evening, starting a new segment here called Answering Awful Arguments, where I'm going to be reviewing bad arguments against the Catholic Church. It'll generally be on Tuesdays. So what I'm going to do on this one is review a video by Jay Dyer. It is called, well, let me look at it, Top 5 Simple Arguments Against Papal Infallibility. I have to look at it on the computer over here, although I'll pull it up on the screen here in a moment. I think he should have retitled it to Top 5 Simplistic Arguments Against Papal Infallibility. I think that would have been a little bit more fitting for the delivery of his content and the content itself. But be that as it may, we're still going to review it. Mostly because a lot of people asked me to, especially a lot of the patrons. And so, in keeping with doing at least one video a month where I review or just address a topic that the patrons want me to, here we are. So let's review the video by Jay Dyer against the papacy. It's not very long. It's only about 13 minutes long. We'll see how long it takes for us to get through it. Let me pull it up on my screen here. Let me share it and also get the audio going. Okay. Y'all should be able to see it now. Please let me know if you can't hear it, however. All right, we are going to start from the very beginning. So let's go.
For bite-sized videos, you got it. We're going to be talking about the top 5 simple arguments against the doctrine of the papacy, particularly the Vatican I doctrine of the papal monarchy.
And I'll be upfront with you. Dyer doesn't know much about the magisterium. I think he was a Catholic for over 10 years. I believe that's what he said. I don't know. It's been a while since I've heard his testimony, but I think he was Catholic for 10 years, but it doesn't show. At least when it comes to magisterial studies, I would say. He's not very proficient when it comes to this matter, especially Vatican I. So I'm looking forward to this.
And my first point is just very simple. If the dogma of papal infallibility as defined at Vatican I is always true, was always true, will always be true, the very foundation upon which the church was built, as Roman Catholics typically claim, we always knew this was the case. And why did it take 19 centuries for the church to clarify and say what this doctrine is? In fact,
worst argument that you could offer against papal infallibility, in my opinion. I could help him out and give him some better arguments against the papacy, but wow, yeah, that's a really bad one. I mean, let's just start with Nicaea. It took 300 years to deal with the deity of Christ. Why weren't they dealing with that in the first century? I mean, it's just a really bad argument. 787 years to dogmatize icons? Nonsense, right? There are things that do take time. And there are also different occasions in which matters are defined, especially if there's some kind of threat against a particular dogma. It's then defined. Now, Vatican I's a little different, and the reasons behind papal infallibility is a little different. And that's why John Henry Newman objects to the possibility of defining papal infallibility at that time. He wasn't necessarily opposed to the doctrine, but he was just questioning the prudence of it. Is this really even necessary right now? Although I think by the time of Vatican I, yeah, it is necessary, especially to deal with conciliarism. So by that time, we need an answer. In fact, I think that one could make the case that it should have been defined well before 1870. So I partly agree that it shouldn't have taken this long to define, but that's a really bad argument against the validity or veracity, I should say, of a dogma. Just because something takes a long time to be defined doesn't mean it's not actually something that is part of the deposit of faith. I mean, it took quite a long time for the Eastern Orthodox Church to dogmatize Palimism. Does that somehow mean that Palimism isn't true according to the Eastern Orthodox? Although I know some Orthodox would dispute Palimism, but I think the majority of them would probably recognize the essence and energies distinction as understood by Palamas. So the point is, when it's defined, doesn't necessarily take away from the truthfulness of the claim. I mean, we can put the Eastern Orthodox to the same standard, and they would fail when it comes to that standard. So I'm not buying that argument. I think it's a very horrible one.
Wouldn't it have been one of the first doctrines that was proclaimed as dogmatic? Wouldn't it have been in the creed? It's not even in the creed.
Okay, let me ask you something. How important is it in Eastern Orthodoxy that the bishop is the head of his diocese? How important is that? Would it be dogmatic? Is that in the creed? Is the essence and energies distinction in the creed? Is icon veneration in the creed? I mean, this is just a really bad argument. It's entirely inconsistent. And it's designed to score points with people who are extremely ignorant and don't know much about church history or theology. And that's primarily his target audience. Young teenagers, don't have families, don't know much about theology, don't have much experience. Now, I'm not knocking all of those viewers. Some of them are pretty sharp, but you know how it is. When you're a teenager, you're often impressionable, inexperienced, and have a lot to learn, but you think you know it all. That's his target audience, and he scores points with them. But when you really ask, okay, wait, is this a consistent argument for Eastern Orthodox? No, it's not. So to say, well, it's not in the creed, come on. There's a lot of things that Eastern Orthodox would assert as dogmatic and essential and indisputable that is not in the creed.
And yet this is supposed to be the foundation of the one true church. If it was a universal, clear, apostolic, Petrine charism and doctrine, then there wouldn't have been a need for all of these disputes, all of these ecumenical councils.
Let's pause there. Let's take this to its logical conclusion. The Eastern Orthodox have done terrible in expressing their understanding of primacy in the church, especially on the universal level. That's why they have a schism going on right now. Isn't that foundational to the church? Obviously it is. Common sense would tell you it is. History would tell you it is. And yet, they still don't have an answer. It's not like, well, they gave us an answer in 1870. No, we're still waiting. Still waiting on the Orthodox to give us an answer on that one. So at least we have been able to provide an answer when it comes to primacy and papal infallibility in 1870. We're still waiting on you guys to give us an answer here when it comes to primacy in the church. You can't get organized enough to even come together and discuss it, let alone dogmatize it. So, I mean, this is just an extremely weak argument, again, designed to target impressionable, ignorant people who don't think of, well, wait, let me ask this. How is this consistent with Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology and Eastern Orthodoxy itself? It's generally going to be geared to people who aren't thinking along those lines.
Called by emperors, not popes. There wouldn't have been ecumenical councils that condemned popes, like Honorius. There wouldn't have been an ecumenical council that solved the so-called crisis of the Great Western Schism when you had more.
All right, so the issue with Honorius comes up, obviously. It comes up with pretty much everybody who's ignorant about this subject. Yeah, we're aware of Honorius, Jay. They were actually aware of that at Vatican I, and you know that. Obviously, there are ways to reconcile the case of Honorius with papal infallibility. We did that in 1870. We do it to this day. I ultimately don't have a major issue with saying that Honorius was condemned. We could even say as a heretic, although I think at best he was a material heretic. I don't think there was any form to his heresy. But in theory, we could talk about actually a formally heretical pope, and I've done that many, many times. I have many shows on it. You can just type my name in, can the pope be deposed or something like that, and you'll see videos come up where I talk about this. So ultimately, I don't flinch when somebody brings up Honorius. That, to me, that is a sign of somebody who is ignorant about the subject. That, or they are just deliberately being misleading. I don't know. It's one of the two. Hate to judge a person's intentions, but it kind of seems like Jay should know better at this point, especially if he was a Catholic for 10 years. So he should know the responses. I don't have an issue with saying that Honorius was condemned. What I do have an issue with is the fact that the Eastern Orthodox will accept the Sixth Ecumenical Council as ecumenical. Some will even go so far as to say that there are absolutely no errors in any of the ecumenical councils, not talking about their canons, but even in the acta, minus if like a heretic is quoted or something. But other than that, even in the acta, there's infallibility there. Now, there's different views there among Eastern Orthodox, but the point is the Orthodox are going to hold the Sixth Ecumenical Council in high esteem. And of course, the Sixth Ecumenical Council is where Honorius is being condemned, right? Well, I want you to notice something here about the Sixth Ecumenical Council. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Let me get it on my screen. 1 second. There we go. And I've done shows on this before. We've talked about it. Do my best to read it. It's pretty far. Let me see if I can adjust it. Okay. One second. Finding my spot here. Do a keyword search. In fact, I've done a show on this one specifically, trying to find the exact spot. It's part of Agatho's letter. Oh, well, I'll have to pull it up here and again in a moment. It's part of Agatho's letter. And he talks about how the Roman See is unblemished even to this day. We've done entire shows on this. So just maybe go and check out, type in maybe Michael Lofton, Pope Agatho. It should come up where we go over the text itself. We go over not only just Agatho, but over quite a few other papal texts in the first 7 ecumenical councils, including Pope Leo and some interesting things that he said there in his letters. Now, the point is, he appeals to the apostolic see. He says Peter himself in his role is active still in his successor in the apostolic see, that is the Bishop of Rome. And he says it's unblemished to this day. Now, how can that be reconciled with Honorius? As an Eastern Orthodox, how do you reconcile that? Because I know as a Catholic how I can reconcile Agatho's words that is read out loud to the council. The council accepts, which is an even more difficult problem for those who maintain conciliar fundamentalism, as I've noted before. They accept it, and yet he says that. even to this day, in spite of the case of Honorius, even to this day, the papacy is unblemished. What do you make of that? How is that? Again, I can reconcile the case of Honorius and what Agathos says at the Sixth Council. I can reconcile the two. As an Orthodox, however, how do you do that? That's the problem. That's the issue. We could even talk about the Seventh Ecumenical Council, where Pope Hadrian is writing to the emperor and the empress. It's mentioned there in session 2. It's read at session 2 before the Council Fathers. And it's noted how the Bishop of Rome is the successor of Peter, and how it is going to endure as his successor forever. In other words, the position of primacy that Rome holds is going to be intact forever. It can't be transferred to Constantinople or elsewhere. It can't lose the faith and become defective. It's going to remain faithful. Let me actually read it. I think I have that one pulled up here. Let's see. I got to get it set up to where I can see the computer right here in front of me. I'll probably do that within the next few days. I didn't have a chance to set it up. Here it is. For the blessed Peter himself, the chief of the apostles who sat in the apostolic see, left the chiefship of his apostolate and pastoral care to his successors, who are to sit in his most holy seat forever. Notice that. They're to sit in his most holy seat forever. Not until they teach heresy, until they teach the filioque or something like that. Forever. And the power of authority which he received from the Lord our Savior. Notice that he believes that Peter was singled out among the apostles and received authority directly from Christ. These are the papal claims. He too bestowed and delivered by divine command to the pontiffs, his successors. So the authority, the divine authority that is passed to Peter is passed to his successors, the pontiffs. This is taught at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. As an Orthodox, how do you understand that? Makes total sense to me. It's going to make very little sense to you as an Orthodox. This is the problem that Jay has, because he's going to talk over and over and over constantly about, oh, well, the councils teach this and the councils don't agree. And why did it take so long? And why do we even have councils if papal infallibility, blah, blah, blah. As if Vatican I is condemning all forms of conciliarism. No, I mean, it's obviously condemning a form of conciliarism, one that asserts itself above the Pope. That doesn't mean that synods and councils are intrinsically wrong and evil and aren't even part of the constitution of the church. It doesn't follow. They're compatible with papal supremacy and infallibility. They're compatible with the office of the papacy. It makes sense that you would have a head for the council. It's insane that you wouldn't. It's unreasonable that you wouldn't. And it's even against the Seventh Ecumenical Council here, that is teaching an ecclesiology that Eastern Orthodox cannot maintain. They cannot say what Hadrian just said there. They can't do that. Not in good conscience. They would have to redefine terms to the extent that it means nothing. This is a problem. So while he's talking about councils and everything like that, this is going to sound really convincing to people who really don't know much about the ecumenical councils. It's not going to sound convincing to people who are a little bit more educated in the faith. They're going to see right past this stuff. All right, let's continue.
Multiple people claiming to be the true Pope. And so what do we have there? Constance, a council over the Pope.
All right, multiple people claiming to be the Pope. That hasn't been an issue. I mean, that was going on while the Eastern Orthodox were still in communion with the Catholics, right? I mean, there's been anti-popes from almost day one, and that wasn't somehow, against the papacy in the first millennium, either for the West or the East. But I think what he's getting at is that Constance there in Hic Sancta says what it says, that it has immediate authority by Christ and is able to judge the case here of the pontiff. So that even the pontiff himself, the Pope, has the answer to the council because it receives its power immediately from Christ. And everybody cries out and says, no, conciliarism, that's condemned. I've challenged that. I challenge whether or not that is actually necessarily the case. Nothing new here. I've spoken about this many times, about Hic Sancta. I'm not willing to concede yet that Hic Sancta necessarily has to be interpreted in a conciliarist way. I know that there are people who were at Constance who were conciliarists, but there are also people at Nicaea who would have denied the deity of the Holy Spirit. They didn't at the council, but of course they would have. In fact, that's one of the reasons why it wasn't addressed. They kind of passed over that issue because they knew, okay, this is going to be another controversial issue. So we'll deal with that later. And they did have to. But the point is, I know that there were some people at Constance that probably would have maintained that, but I'm not necessarily buying this, that we have to believe that Hic Sancta must be interpreted in a conciliarist fashion. I've talked about before how I think that it could be interpreted in a non-conciliarist fashion, and it's referring to cases of emergency where it's questionable who the Pope is, and in that case, the council has authority over to the people who are claiming to be Pope when it is disputable, legitimately disputable, and unclear who the Pope is in emergency cases, but not ordinarily. That's the way I've understood Hic Sancta. And again, several popes accepted Hic Sancta afterwards. So, what was it? Martin V, I think, and Eugene IV, I believe, also. So several of them accepted it and didn't seem to make any qualifications that would eliminate Hic Sancta altogether. And I'm aware of the caveats that some people try to put out there, and it still doesn't escape the issue because they try to say, well, Martin V said that he ratified the sessions, only on the things that pertain to salvation and faith and morals. Well, I would say this issue falls under that category. So Hic Sancta seems to be have been accepted by Martin V. There's other reasons why it seems pretty clear that multiple popes accepted it. Again, I don't have a problem with accepting Hic Sancta in a qualified, non-conciliarist sense, in a way that's compatible with Vatican I. But at the end of the day, let's just say that, Hic Sancta can't be salvaged, and there's no proper interpretation for it that fits Vatican I. There are some challenging positions that would come against my position and say that perhaps it's still questionable what exactly Martin V ratified, although I think it's clear enough. They would still say it's not. But at the end of the day, I would then assert, okay, he ratified something that's non-definitive. He didn't necessarily ratify it as definitive. So ultimately, whichever position you take when it comes to Hic Sancta, I don't think that this really poses a death blow for the Catholic position in light of Vatican I and its condemnation of conciliarism. I really don't think that ultimately it's a death blow. But it is extremely involved. There's a lot behind the discussion. I get that. So there's a lot of groundwork that has to be laid. There's a lot to it. And the average person doesn't know enough about it to really, to really follow the conversation. So we'll talk more about Hic Sancta another time. But I bring it up here because Jay brought it up. And I think that ultimately it's not a defeater for us. So I'm going to go ahead and maintain that it is for emergency purposes. Therefore, it's not conciliar. It's not promoting conciliarism. And now we don't have a problem. Now what?
Few generations, the Pope reasserts his supremacy over the councils. These are all clear, known.
Yeah, and the popes were asserting their primacy over the councils even at the Fifth Council, as you probably know, Jay. Well, you might not know. I don't know if he's read Price and the Acts of the Council, the Fifth Council. I don't know if he has. But if he has, he would know that even in the case of Vigilius, as awkward as that was for the Catholic position, it's probably the most awkward ecumenical council for the Catholic position on papal supremacy because it attempts to suspend him in one of its sessions. As awkward as that is, Price rightly notes, Vigilius thought he was supreme over an ecumenical council. He was over there writing doctrinal tomes and everything while the council was still in session, bypassing the council. He thought that the council was irrelevant. An ecumenical council was irrelevant. He had authority over it, and he could overturn the entire thing with whatever he writes. That's what Vigilius thought. Now, as an Orthodox, you might say, well, Vigilius was wrong. Okay. But it's there, right? You have popes who believe that at the very least. You say they're wrong, but they maintained that they were superior to a council. Leo maintained that as well. He didn't even think Chalcedon was necessary. He allowed it basically for accommodating purposes. He didn't even think it was necessary. He thought his tome settled it all. There were plenty of popes who taught papal infallibility and especially papal supremacy in the first millennium. And Eastern Orthodox scholars recognize this. And now Jay's not a scholar, so he's not willing to admit it, but Eastern Orthodox scholars recognize this, as I've noted previously on the show. And I've read out some very, very telling quotes from them where they're effectively saying, yeah, the Catholic claims are there in the first millennium. For sure. We just reject them for this or that reason, but they were definitely there. And there were a lot of our saints who were popes who taught the Catholic claims. It's kind of awkward for the Orthodox. Well, we've talked a lot about that already, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse here.
Classic historical examples that run completely contrary to the supposed obvious claim, right? That everybody from the earliest days throughout the whole world knew the supremacy of the Roman bishop meant.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Look, you're engaging probably the worst of Catholics here. Yeah, I know there's some Catholics out there that say that, but that's not very, it's pretty easy to beat up on the low hanging fruit. Now, okay. Let me first say there is sometimes language, even in the church itself, the magisterium itself, that talks about this being the constant faith of the church, which I don't have a problem with, because I would say that it is attested to consistently throughout history. Yes, there have been people who objected to it historically. That is the papal claims. Just like there are people who objected to the deity of Christ and the veneration of icons and things like that. Just because somebody objects to it doesn't take away from the fact that this was the teaching of the church. And I think it's very well attested to in the first millennium. Much more than the veneration of iconography, let's be frank. The Seventh Ecumenical Council talks about the tradition of the veneration of icons in a way that it thinks that this is the constant teaching of the church and constantly attested to by the fathers, except for the fact that there's plenty of fathers that don't attest to it and would say otherwise, except for that awkward part. And except for the awkward part that the Seventh Council is quoting from saints that actually doesn't go back to them and using that to back up its doctrine. Now, ultimately, I hold to the Seventh Council. I affirm the dogma. But as Price is going to note, Robert Price, famous scholar here in this period, as Price is going to note, Nicaea II got the doctrine right, but the history wrong. And the history was on the sign of the iconoclasts. And frankly, there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Ultimately, however, still affirm what Nicaea II says. And I believe that it is the witness of the church. But there's a lot of people who oppose that witness, and some of them were saints. Same applies here to the papacy. So if we're going to be consistent, if you're going to criticize us for using that kind of language for the papacy, do the same for yourself when it comes to the Seventh Ecumenical Council, and ask how that works out. If you're going to dismiss Vatican I on these grounds, by the same grounds, you need to dismiss the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Nicaea II. Or you can do like me and just say, well, no, there's better arguments out there. That's a bad argument. That undermines my own position. That undermines me at the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Maybe I shouldn't use that argument. Maybe I should use something else. But of course, if you're not really interested in being consistent, or you're just not aware of the need to be consistent, you're going to make arguments like this, and you'll score points with a lot of impressionable people who don't know much about history or theology. You will score a lot of points with them. I grant that. Those people are eventually going to find out the problems and go elsewhere. They're going to become disenchanted, or disillusioned, I should say.
Vatican I. That's the Vatican I claim. And so all that's necessary really is to show that that isn't the case. If that isn't the case, then Vatican I is not true when it claims that that was always the case. As a rejoinder to that, typically there's an argument made about the evolution of doctrine. Now, the irony is that documents like Pacendi of Pius X explicitly state that there is no evolution of doctrine, and that's a modernist.
It's Pacendi. And as far as Pacendi is concerned, and the evolution of doctrine, as he puts it, look, we affirm Pacendi. You even have in the post-conciliar church, Paul VI affirming that there's no evolution of dogma or doctrine. We affirm that in the pre-conciliar era and in the post. There's no evolution of doctrine or dogma. Truth, or something that is true before the council and after council. I mean, it's going to be true in every age. The substance remains the same. It's even affirmed there at Vatican II in the opening speech of John the 23rd, who's clear to say that the number one purpose of the Second Vatican Council is to guard the deposit of faith, and that the substance remains the same. He's affirming Vatican I there, Pacendi, and other preconciliar documents. The constant teaching of the church, the Vincentian canon, for crying out loud, is what we're effectively defending there. And we're not saying in the post-conciliar era that that's no longer true, that now doctrine can change into something that it wasn't substantially. I don't know who he's been reading. He hasn't been reading any traditional Catholics. He hasn't been reading the Magisterium. The Magisterium completely decries the idea that doctrine evolves and changes substantially. So this is just pure misrepresentation of the Catholic position. He's acting as if we teach that doctrine and dogma can substantially change, and we don't.
Tenet. And yet Roman Catholics will appeal to doctrine itself undergoing an evolutionary development to justify the...
No, we won't. No, we won't. Who are you talking about? Name these Catholics for me. Are you talking about some liberals out there? Again, I can find you liberals all over the place in Eastern Orthodoxy, and you're going to just say, well, that's not what we teach. That's not what the councils teach. You're just going to point me to an objective standard. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to do the same with you. You point me to some liberal theologian out there that teaches that dogma changes. I'm just going to point you to the magisterium itself, and not the preconciliar only. I'm going to point you to magisterial documents in the postconciliar era, from the Second Vatican Council effectively to the present. There's quite a few magisterial documents and propositions that I can lay out. In fact, we can do a whole show on it. If anybody is interested in that, we can do a show on it. And show in the post-conciliar era, we still maintain that. So this is 100% a straw man. And I have to ask, why is Jay doing that?
The fact that admittedly, this was not the practice of the church in the first 1,000 years. I'll leave.
Oh, wait, Jay. Even though I would dispute this idea about the practice of the church, because I think the practice of the church in the first millennium is compatible with our assertions at Vatican I. But let's put that issue to the side. Let's just go with your little straw man here. Okay, let's talk about the practice of the church. Prior to the Seventh Council, let's talk about the practice of the church when it comes to icon veneration. Talk to me about that. Give me some sources. Because most of the sources that are quoted are spurious, and you know that. Well, maybe you don't, but you should know that. That's a problem. Now, ultimately, it's not a death blow for me as a Catholic, because I can still maintain the Seventh Council. and what it taught, even if I can't point to even one church father who practiced icon veneration, I can still affirm the Seventh Council. You know why? Because I have a magisterium, and I believe it's protected by the Holy Spirit. So I actually don't need any church father. I mean, church fathers help in attesting to the faith. Absolutely. They're definitely a rule that the magisterium itself uses. So I'm not dismissing them. But what I'm saying is if no writing exists, or is extant, I should say, that testifies to the veneration of icons from a father, I would still affirm the Seventh Ecumenical Council. But how can you still affirm it in light of what you just said? The constant practice of the church. Let's talk about the practice of the church. What was the practice of the church until, say, I don't know, the 500s? What was the practice of the church when it came to icon veneration? I think you know the answer. Are we being consistent is my question.
This essay, by the way, down below, you can get the longer arguments to this effect. An easier way to see that the Roman Catholic Church is not the true church is the papacy has now basically confirmed with no ambiguity that it does not teach the doctrine of the death penalty. Prior to this modern
this is false, but I'll let him finish.
Reassessment, according to John Paul II and now Francis, the death penalty was classed as part of natural justice, aka natural law.
Provide your sources. When have we said that the death penalty falls under natural law? I'm curious to see that. I just haven't seen that before. I can say that the morality of the death penalty is attested to in Scripture, in the book of Romans. So I can appeal to divine revelation. I can appeal to Pope Leo X, Exsurge Domine, and others. So, I mean, I can appeal to the magisterium in sacred Scripture. But natural law? What is it about the nature of man that says that the death penalty is dogmatic, or I don't know exactly what he's asserting. I mean, what is it about the nature of man that necessitates the death penalty? Let me ask it that way. I'm just curious to hear that one. I don't know. That one's new to me. But be that as it may, we're going to deal with the actual doctrine here in just a second, because he misrepresented things. He said that the doctrine is no longer taught. That's not true.
Now, even in Roman Catholic theology, they don't believe that the Pope can undo, change, or alter natural law, much less supernatural law. So the idea that this could be done away with or changed, which it absolutely has.
It has not. We're talking about a matter of discipline. The doctrine is still the same. That's the misrepresentation here. First of all, we're not talking about an issue of natural law. We're talking about a doctrine that's revealed in Scripture, Revelation, and is attested to in tradition. And the doctrine is still maintained. The discipline, however, is what is being spoken of today by Pope Francis. He says explicitly in his revision here to the Catechism on the death penalty that it's inadmissible. Inadmissible. He doesn't say that the doctrine has changed. He doesn't say that the doctrine is wrong and it was wrong in all cases and it's intrinsically evil. He doesn't say that. He says it's inadmissible. Why, though? Why is it inadmissible? He makes a prudential decision here based on his understanding of the facts today. And I'm going to read them to you here in just a second. I happen to not necessarily agree with him. I see where he's coming from, and I see the potential danger of what he's concerned about. And he's concerned about basically wrongful convictions. And that's why he believes it's inadmissible. And I'm going to show that to you because it's in the letter written to the bishops that was accompanying this change. And Jay should know that. Jay should be representing us accurately. In the accompanying letter sent to the bishops on this very issue, here's what it says. Furthermore, it is to be rejected due to defective selectivity of the criminal justice system and in the face of the possibility of judicial error. It is in this light that Pope Francis has asked for a revision of the formulation of the Catechism. It's in this light that he considers it inadmissible. It's in this light that he's asking for the revision, not because the doctrine has changed, but because he thinks, well, you could have wrongful convictions and our justice system isn't set up very well when it comes to this. So, we might be killing somebody innocent, and that's against their dignity, and the way that it's done is against their dignity, and blah, blah, blah. You can disagree with all of that. This is a prudential decision, and you can disagree with it. Donum Veritatis, paragraph 24, section 3. I quote it almost every show. Go and read it. The Catholic Church, in its magisterial documents itself, Donum Veritatis, recognizes that the popes could err in matters of prudence here and there. It can't habitually err. That's forbidden according to Donum Veritatis 24:3. But it can, here and there, err in matters of prudence. And in those cases, we are not necessarily bound to assent. So, in this case, as a Catholic, you are free to disagree with Pope Francis on the matter. He might be right, he might be wrong. You're free to decide that after you've done the proper research. I ask that you don't flippantly dismiss him, and don't dismiss him too quickly. Research this. Give him proper respect as the Holy Father. But after your research, if you've concluded, it's not lining up. You are free to dispense with that obligation to assent in this particular case, since it's a matter of prudence. This isn't against Vatican I. Vatican I, papal infallibility. Do we really have to go over the standard for papal infallibility? In fact, I'm sure we've done this on several shows before. It's been a little while, but we've done it. And we go over what constitutes an act of the papal magisterium that is infallible and is extraordinary. What all has to be there for something to be taught definitively by the Pope. And he knows very well matters of prudence doesn't fall under that. But you'll notice in the video, he doesn't put this in the realm of prudence. He puts this in the realm of dogma. And again, his viewers are going to generally be impressionable and ignorant about this matter. And they're going to think, wow, that's a death blow against papal infallibility. In fact, it's dishonest at worst. It's negligent at best. It's not true. This is not a change in dogma or doctrine. That still remains the same. The discipline of whether or not it should be implemented today is something else. He says it's inadmissible. He doesn't say it's evil and intrinsically so. All right, let's move on.
Dispute, right, as something that's no longer viable for the modern church. This is another proof that the Roman Catholic positions and dogmas change. The true church and her doctrines,
the doctrine hasn't changed. This is, once again, either negligence on part of Jay or misrepresentation. Deliberately. I don't know. I don't want to judge his intentions. But like I said, him being a Catholic for 10 years, he should know better. So I hold him to that standard. I would hold a Protestant who has never been Catholic before to a different standard than Jay, who has been Catholic and is basically presenting himself as somebody who is knowledgeable on the topic of Catholicism. Well, okay, if that's the case, if you have put it out there, you've been a Catholic for 10 years, and you present yourself as somebody who's knowledgeable, you know what? I'm going to hold you to that standard. And this is dreadful. Dreadful. You should know better than this. This is very pitiful. Again, nobody said the doctrine changed. Show me where Pope Francis says that, and then we'll talk. Until then, I already showed. He says it's inadmissible. And then I showed on what grounds he believes it's inadmissible. And he doesn't say it's because of doctrine. He says it's because of, well, he believes the justice system is flawed. You can agree or disagree there. But it's no longer in the realm of doctrine and dogma. It changes the doctrine and dogma. That's nonsense.
Dogmas cannot change. So I think this is one of the strongest modern examples of the papacy as an evolving doctrine.
Yeah, dogmas can't change, but let's be real. I've heard Jay try to define what a dogma is, and he can't even define it properly. So let's just be frank here. Jay doesn't even know what a dogma is. He thinks he knows what it is, but when he defines it, it's not actually what a dogma is. So he's number one, already out of his league when it comes to this, let alone he's really not prepared to discuss whether or not there's been changes to dogmas in the Catholic Church.
Next, I would point to the papacy as a universal temporal power. Nobody in the first 1,000 years of the church taught this. The infamous bull of 1302 of Boniface VIII, Unum Sanctum, is what really pushes this.
Yeah, that's questionable right there already, especially when we come to the papacy of Gelasius.
Into the fore. So this is a medieval Renaissance papal doctrine eventually. And this allows for there to be the accumulation of much wealth. Eventually, this allows for there to be the Vatican.
Yeah, and now this is becoming nonsensical. Look, when it comes to this issue of the Pope being a sovereign ruler and temporal power, it's based on two things. Number one, is Christ king of all the earth? Yes. Okay. So we've established the kingship of Christ. Wonderful. All right. Is Peter and the Pope his successors? Or not his successors, but is Peter his vicar? And Peter's successors, are they the Pope? And does his authority, the authority of Christ, pass from himself to Peter to the pontiffs? Well, according to Hadrian that we just saw earlier at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the answer is yes. So when you put together the papal doctrine, it logically follows that the Pope is able to exercise the kingship of Christ on the earth. So it's based on that. So what you have to do is effectively refute papal supremacy to refute the temporal power aspect. That's what you have to do. And so far he hasn't done that, so I'm going to dismiss him.
Bank. I don't remember Jesus telling Peter that he should establish a global usury-based bank.
Well, I do remember Jesus talking to the apostles about the money bag. You remember that one, Jay? Anyways. Yeah, no, he didn't talk to them about establishing a bank, but I mean, hey, don't the bishops in your churches do quite a few things that Jesus didn't explicitly say to do? I mean, there's been plenty of things that are not exactly taught by Jesus in the New Testament. I mean, you don't believe in sola scriptura, but you're using sola scriptura arguments against Catholics. It just sounds really odd. But notice he mentioned usurious there. So, Jay, I guess you don't own a credit card or, any stocks, or I guess you don't have a 401k or anything like that. Basically, you can't do business today without, in some form, at least remotely cooperating in some kind of interest. It's a joke to think otherwise. Now, do we all of a sudden accept usury? No. Here's the problem. Here's where Jay is weak. We don't say that usury is okay. Usury is still a sin. What has developed is our understanding of what constitutes usury. And this is not unique just to Catholics. Orthodox have this same development. And this has been going on for a very long time. What constitutes usury is what has developed. Usury is still a sin. But any interest on a loan, at one point that was considered usury by some. But at this point, it's not. And there's different reasons for that development historically. And we could do a show on that, talking about it. The point is, however, no, we're not saying it's okay to have a usurious bank or something. No, that's nonsense. That's a straw man. Again, hoping that he's going to basically have a whole bunch of people who don't know better who are watching, and this is going to score points with them.
But rather, the church is a spiritual institution. There's nothing like this in the first 1,000 years, and this is
okay. The church is a spiritual institution, but you do have buildings, don't you, Jay? right? I mean, you're not Protestant, are you? I know you used to be Protestant, but you're sounding a lot like a Protestant at this point. Y'all do have buildings, don't you? Y'all do have bank accounts, don't y'all? Yeah, of course you do. So you do recognize some temporality to the church, right? Okay. So what's the problem here?
Why the church basically had to, in the West, rely on forgeries, the donation of Constantine, other
Forgeries. Oh, I love this argument. Except for the fact that our papal claims don't necessarily rely on forgeries. Because I just gave you an example at the Seventh Council of the Papal Claims. We can mention many in Leo and quite a few others, where the papal claims are asserted in the first millennium by Orthodox saints and popes. And none of them depend on forgeries. So the forgery argument is irrelevant. But let's talk about forgeries, Jay. Let's do that. Let's talk about forgeries. Let's talk about your Saint Photius that you're going to mention here in a moment. Let's talk about that. Yeah. You know, it's curious. Photius engaged in a little bit of forgery himself. Even though I accept Photius as a saint, I recognize that there were some things that he did that I wouldn't approve of, just like Clement of Alexandria. I'm sorry, Cyril of Alexandria. And just like St. Jerome, for that matter. Now, I digress. Photius engaged in a little bit of alteration to some documents from the Pope. But you know what he didn't change? The papal claims. Let me show you a screenshot here. This is coming from a book that Jay is going to read to us here in a minute, that he's going to reference as an authority. So let me just go ahead and preemptively reference it myself as an authority. This is from Dvorak. And page 143 of his Photian Schism. And notice what he says. This passage, of course, could not remain in the Greek version of the letter and was thoroughly overhauled. Mention of Ignatius, of the Eighth Council, and of the Apology is suppressed. He's talking about alterations to documents here in the context of Photius. He had to alter some things out from what the Pope said. It didn't help his case, so let me take this and that part out. But notice what he didn't take out, according to Dvorak. But curiously enough, even the Greek version, for all its doctoring, has preserved some expression endorsing the Roman thesis of the primacy, which John VIII appealed to in the original. Then he goes on to talk about it. Let me minimize that there. That doesn't help your case now, does it, Jay? When you start to bring up forgeries, we could throw that back in your face. We can talk about forgeries at the Council of Florence, where the Greek delegates are using forgeries unknowingly. Let's talk forgeries. It exists on both sides. Let's talk about forgeries when it comes to the papal claims and Constantinople using them to support its own primacy and its own claims, ironically. Yeah, let's talk about that. What about this? What about Photius? Still maintaining the papal claims in this doctrine, this letter that he was altering. What do you do with that?
famous forgeries had to back up this absurd claim to universal temporal supremacy. And really, this just lends credence to the critique of St. Justin Popovich that this is a humanist institution. Now, another argument is that the modern papacy itself, at least the papacy of the post-Vatican II era, what most Roman Catholics acknowledge as the legitimate papacy, most even traditional Catholics admit that the Eastern churches, as in terms of the Orthodox, have retained their faith, their succession, and their spirituality
No, they haven't maintained the faith. They don't maintain the faith when it comes to papal supremacy. They don't maintain the faith when it comes to papal infallibility. Some of them don't maintain the faith when it comes to filioque. Depends on which Orthodox you talk to. Some of them don't maintain the faith on the Immaculate Conception. Depends on which one of them you talk to. Some of them don't maintain the faith on original sin. Depends on which one you talk to. Some of them don't even maintain simplicity, for crying out loud, which even Palamas accepted. Some Orthodox even want to put that into dispute. So some don't maintain the faith there, depending on who we're talking about. And this is part of the problem, is they're so divided doctrinally that you have to sit here and qualify depending on who we're talking about when it comes to every doctrine out there. It's easier for me to list the things that they do believe that and do agree on than they don't. And it's generally because of a unity that was already there from the papacy. Very little of it that was after the papacy. Some of it, however, was due to the emperor, which they no longer have, of course. So I'm not going to say that, oh, they have just perfectly maintained to preserve the faith. No, they have not. That can't be seriously asserted. There's some serious problems with the Orthodox. Whatever good there is with the Orthodox, whatever they've maintained when it comes to the sacraments, some fundamental, substantial deficiencies there. The Orthodox Church is not the universal church. It is not the one church established by Christ. There is some participation in it. Sure, we can talk about that on a local level. There's some participation. But it is not the one church established by Christ. There's a problem. So I'm not accepting what he's saying here.
For the last millennium, without the papacy. So if we've maintained our faith.
You haven't maintained the faith, and you don't even agree with each other on the faith. Stop lying. That, or it's hard for me to discern, is he lying or is he just this ignorant? But I know that he can't be that ignorant. So it really does seem like lying. I think you know better than that. You're not in agreement on the faith. You can't even agree on who is the first in the church and what that means. What does it mean to be the first? Basic fundamental questions of ecclesiology on the universal level you can't answer. Let alone we start to get into other issues like original sin, the Immaculate Conception, the atonement. There's not unity there among the Orthodox. Stop pretending as if there is. There's not even unity on the canon of Scripture. There's problems there as well.
Without the papacy for the last 1,000 years, without the community.
And again, the unity that you want to talk about, even though I don't accept it as a real unity, but whatever unity you have, most of it was due to the emperor after the papacy. And guess what? You don't have an emperor anymore. So what do you do now?
Union of the Roman See, that itself is an attestation to the fact the church does not require the papacy to be.
Terrible, terrible argument.
To exist, to know and recognize truth. Beyond that, I would say the canons of the councils themselves, not just one canon, not just a couple councils. I'll leave a link below to the canons of all the ecumenical councils specifically that we picked out that reflect the mind of all of those councils, right? That specifically are contrary to Vatican I's doctrine.
There are no canons in the first 7 ecumenical councils that are directly against Vatican I. Even the canons that various popes disputed, like Canon 28 of Chalcedon, which we later on accepted, they don't go against Vatican I. There are no canons in the first 7 ecumenical councils that go against the papal claims. But there are quite a few, and there are many things attested to at the ecumenical councils of the first 7 councils that do testify to the papal claims, as we've shown many times on the show. That's why I just find this incredibly either neglectful or misleading. He should know better than this.
Doctrine of the papacy. How can it be the case that Vatican I was always true, was always known, if basically the mind of the church at every ecumenical council is enacting all of these canons contrary to the attitude and doctrine of Vatican I.
That's not true. I don't accept that. That's 100% not the case. Again, look at Pope Leo and look at his relation to Chalcedon. Study the history there and tell me if what Jay just said is true. That's not true. Study the Fifth Council. Tell me if that was true. Study the Sixth Council. Tell me if that was true. If what he's saying is true, yeah, that would be a problem for the Catholics, but it's not true. That's the problem. As I've shown many, many times already on the show. Done several videos on this. Because, I mean, you hear this stuff all the time from Orthodox, especially the online ones. It's not true. I don't accept that. I would say start with Pope Leo. That right there refutes your position.
It's very easy to see this, right? Not just Canon 6 of Nicaea, but...
Yeah, Canon 6 of Nicaea is not against papal jurisdiction on the universal level. No, not at all. We've done shows on this as well, addressing the Sixth Canon. And it is not talking about the Bishop of Rome's jurisdiction on a universal level. It's talking about his jurisdiction basically as a, not necessarily a patriarchate, but effectively so, even though it wouldn't have necessarily been called that at the time, but effectively as a patriarch. A super metropolitan, if you will. That's what it's talking about when it's speaking about a limited jurisdiction there of the Pope. It's not talking about his jurisdiction on the universal level, because we don't believe that the Pope has universal jurisdiction insofar as he is the bishop of every diocese. That's what we would have to maintain for your argument to be true. No, we believe he has limited jurisdiction as far as what is his diocese and what is his particular territory as a metropolitan or a patriarch. Yeah, he has limited jurisdiction there. But as the Pope, as the universal shepherd, he does have universal jurisdiction there. We have to just simply distinguish the different offices, if you will, of the Pope, the different levels to his office, if you will.
Many canons throughout the ecumenical councils are directly contrary to the claims of Vatican I.
That's just 100% false. And I challenge that. I'd like to see one. Because every one that I've seen the Orthodox bring up, it's all just elementary, basic preschool arguments like what he just brought up with the Sixth Canon or the 28th Canon of Chalcedon. Just preschool stuff that you would expect to encounter with when it comes to online apologetics. But it's nothing really substantial. It's nothing that Catholics can't maintain. We can maintain every canon of the of the seven councils, and it's still not alter papal jurisdiction as expressed by Vatican I.
Now, in the case, as I mentioned earlier, of somebody like Pope Honorius, we have many mentions, right? It's not like it's just some disputed question about the Sixth Council. No, rather, his condemnation is found in the Acts of the Council near the beginning. His letters were ordered to be burned, Pope Honorius. He is considered in the Seventh Council and in the Synodicon as also heretics to be rejected, along with other heretics. And so the anathematization of Pope Honorius proves that a council can declare and is above a pope. A council can declare popes to have apostatized and become heretics.
I've answered this so many times. It's so frustrating. Again, see my shows where I go over can a pope be deposed. You could have a council come out tomorrow and legitimately depose a pope, and Vatican I is still true. And if you don't know that, that's because you have a misunderstanding either of Vatican I or of just this debate historically. Or you have a misunderstanding of conciliarism. There's some misunderstanding somewhere, either misunderstanding or just ignorance. Again, go and watch this stuff that I've done on can a pope be deposed. Go maybe and watch the video I just did a few weeks ago on John of St. Thomas on deposing a pope. Go and watch that one. That one's a good one to start out with. Maybe check that one.
Again, this is completely contrary to the entire attitude of Vatican I's post-first millennium evolution doctrine.
No, but it is contrary to your misunderstanding and straw man of Vatican I. And that's the problem. I don't accept your straw man. So you set up a straw man of how you understand Vatican I, and then you seek to refute it with poorly attested to historical examples and ignorance on your part. Yeah, I'm not buying it. It's not good enough for me. I'm sorry for the reasons why I've showed so far and many others.
That no one can judge the first see, nor is anyone superior to the first see.
Finish the sentence. Finish it. See, you probably can't even do that. You probably don't even know that there's more to it than that. I mean, it's sad, but he doesn't. You didn't finish it because you think it ends there. But in our tradition, we have canons that finish that. And the rest of it is the first see can't be judged by anyone except when he deviates from the faith. Except when he deviates from the faith. The canon is called Si Papa, S-I-P-A-P-A. If a pope is how it starts. That's why it's called Si Papa. Go and look up canon, Si Papa, and read all about it and study the history behind it. And I understand the history is complex, but he doesn't even seem to be aware of it, that it's even part of our history. And you can't say, well, no, you can't use that anymore in light of Vatican I, because I have shown previously, and many have shown other than just myself, I'm not the only one, that you can still have a pope deposed and that not be conciliarism, and Vatican I still be true. Again, go and watch John of St. Thomas and his deposing of a pope, his understanding of it, his treatment of it, the video that I did on it recently. And I go over some of these things. And we go over the canon Si Papa. I wish Jay was aware of that so he could try to interact with it, but unfortunately he doesn't seem to be. So this is what we got instead.
As I said, right, Pope Leo II confirmed the decrees of this council and expressly states that he rejects and anathematizes Honorius. The Eighth Council.
And yet, why aren't you addressing Agatho and what he says in the Sixth Council, like I mentioned earlier? Why aren't you addressing that? Why aren't you addressing the fact that before the Sixth Council, his letter was read out, which says that his see is unblemished? How could he say that in spite of Honorius? And all the fathers, how could they accept that in light of Honorius? How could they do that, Jay? Please reconcile that for me. I can reconcile that as a Catholic. I don't think you can, which is why you're not even mentioning it here. And it's relevant to what you're saying.
Admits that you cannot change the creed.
Leo III, interesting case here. As Jay is going to wrongly, well, I should say, as Jay is not going to tell you, Leo III does seem to say that he doesn't think the creed should be changed because he thinks that that would mean somehow that he's superior to the fathers if he changed the creed, which doesn't logically follow. I would say that we could disagree with Pope Leo III here, just like we disagree with St. Leo the Great. Pope Leo, we disagree with him on Canon 28. He rejected Canon 28 because he believed it was against the Council of Nicaea. Well, clearly it was wrong, right? I mean, we can say that as Catholics. It's not against papal infallibility. It doesn't meet the conditions of papal infallibility. We can say he was wrong there. Likewise, Leo III, we can say he's wrong. But what he doesn't tell you is that Leo III accepted the doctrine of the Filioque. Now that's awkward. What do you do with multiple popes attesting to the doctrine of the Filioque? What do you do with Augustine, who's attesting to the doctrine of the Filioque, and Augustine in his writings are venerated by the Fifth Ecumenical Council explicitly? What do you do with that? That's awkward. You've condemned Filioque as a heresy. That's weird. Kind of odd. Well, I don't think he does do anything with that. I don't think he does address this issue. He's assuming his audience doesn't know a whole lot about it. This is going to score points with them. And there you go. Sorry, that's not good enough. We see past this nonsense. You have a good point bringing up Leo III. This is the only good point you've brought up so far. This is the only argument that's even worthy of criticism of the Catholic Church. That you would have Leo III who would say that he doesn't think that the creed should be altered. I'd say he's wrong. There are extreme cases in which it could be altered. And guess what? You have to recognize that as an Eastern Orthodox, not only just because the creed was altered, when it comes to 381, Constantinople 1, not only because it was altered there, but actually the very council that you want to appeal to, 879, the language that it uses about not altering the creed, it gives a very interesting qualification. And that qualification is effectively, and in fact, I can bring it up here, that the creed isn't to be altered unless there's some kind of heresy that needs to be addressed. It gives that qualification. So even your own 879, which he may or may not accept as ecumenical, some Orthodox do, some don't, but I know he would accept as at least teaching the truth. Even it teaches an exception. So guess what? You already believe an exception to what Leo III maintained. And you might say, well, okay, that's fine, but I don't accept Vatican I, right? And I do accept Vatican I, and what Leo III said doesn't go against the qualifications of something that's ex cathedra in Vatican I, and you know that. So why even bring it up? It's ultimately not a really good argument when you sit down and really think through it. At first, it sounds like a good argument. Wow, a pope didn't want to add to the creed. Oh, that sounds interesting. That's difficult for Catholics. But then when you start to dig a little deeper, it's not an issue. And then you have to address the fact that Leo III also taught the filioque and affirmed it explicitly. Explicitly. He believed it. We have his letters where he explicitly affirms it, and you know that. And I know that he knows that because the link that he gives us in the description takes us to Orthodox info. And in there, they note that. They admit that. This is an Orthodox website. And they admit that, yeah, Leo III did actually believe the doctrine of the filioque. It gets even more awkward for you because St. Photius knows about that, knows that even successor popes after him, after Leo III, affirm the doctrine of the filioque and are engaging in all kinds of different practices that Photius initially condemns and blasts the Holy See for. And then towards the end of his life, he goes back into communion with Rome. And he just says, you know what? Let Rome's customs be Rome's customs and our customs be ours. And we can agree to disagree. There's your St. Photius, which I agree. He's the saint, but there you go. The very one that you want to try to appeal to when it comes to this stuff. There he is. Accepting Rome. Accepting the fact. Going back into communion with heretics. Heretics who teach the filioque and teach papal supremacy, which he was aware of, as I already demonstrated just even in this video and also in other videos. There's your St. Photius. Not a very good witness for your position. More of a witness for ours.
And I'll leave the link to the Dragas article below. So if you can't change the creed, and that's admitted by the Pope at the time of St. Photius.
No. Go back and read the qualification in the very link that you're providing us. Go and read it. Go and read it. It gives you the qualification. The creed isn't to be changed unless there's some issue of heresy that needs to be contested, blah, 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 blah. It gives you that exception.
Then this should not be an issue, right? I would add, too, that there's other issues that are, I think, pretty glaring. The Chieti document of Rome.
Chieti. I've never heard it called that. I thought it was Chieti.
Right, approved by the papacy, as recently admitted, as well as famous Catholic writers, apologists.
Yeah, and even though the document itself that says something a little bit different than what you're trying to indicate here, even though has absolutely no magisterial weight, has no binding on my conscience as a Catholic, and I can likewise point you to plenty of bishops who are Orthodox who signed off on all kinds of things that you wouldn't accept. I'm no more bound to accept this than you are bound to accept them. Actually, you have more of an obligation to accept what they've signed than I do. But you'll notice if you actually go and read the document itself, it says that the Pope never exercised canonically never exercised jurisdiction. In other words, there weren't any canons that were basically talking about his universal jurisdiction, which I would somewhat dispute. I would actually dispute that and contest that. But I know where they're coming from. I get what they're trying to say.
Just that the Vatican I attitude was not the attitude of the first 1,000 years of the church. Right? Here it is right here.
Yeah, again, this is a really weak argument. What was the attitude of the early church when it comes to images? Tell me about the attitude of those Christians. I would like to know. What was their attitude?
Here's this. Here's the document. You can go read it. I'll put that below.
What was the attitude of the early church when it comes to bowing down to images? Again, I affirm bowing down to images. I accept the Seventh Council. But what was the attitude?
And the Chieti document as well has said that, look, we have to admit that the praxis of the church for the first 1,000 years was conciliarism. It was collegiality. It was not the papal monarchy as characterized.
Not every form of collegiality is opposed to Vatican I papal supremacy. This is where Jay is extremely weak. He thinks it's either papacy, Vatican I, or collegiality. No, I don't accept that. Now, I reject some versions of collegiality, conciliarism. Sure, I reject some forms of collegiality, but not all. The Catholic Church doesn't reject all. The Catholic Church recognizes utility to collegiality. It's not very ideal to have the Pope going around deciding everything apart from all the bishops, just making every single decision himself. That would be absurd.
By Vatican I. And in fact, if you know, Cardinal Ratzinger, Principles of Catholic Theology, and he has this quote that I'll include.
Yeah, Cardinal Ratzinger is not on your side when it comes to this issue.
So here's Pope Benedict XVI, Principles of Catholic Theology, where he admits this. And then the same book later on, pages 216 and 217, admits the same point. Now, it doesn't matter what the dogmatic status of these writings is, because this is admitting the position of orthodoxy.
Okay, so something non-dogmatic, which by that he means non-magisterial. He just doesn't know the proper terms, which again shows that he's ignorant, right? Because something can be magisterial and not dogmatic, right? So why automatically say dogmatic, as if the only level of assent is owed to dogma? I mean, it's just very basic, fundamental misunderstanding of the magisterium and assent. But whatever, let's put that ignorance to the side. Okay. So for some reason, I have to assent to this, even though it's not magisterial, right? I mean, that's what you're effectively suggesting. I have to submit to it. But you yourself would recognize the distinction between what is officially taught and what is not officially taught, what is binding and what is not. Because if I were to say, well, hey, Bishop so-and-so said this in his book, and Bishop Elpidophoros, said this and that, or, and however you pronounce his name, LP is what he's normally called. Is that somehow binding? No, you would recognize, well, no, there are distinctions that are at play here. We are only bound to what the seven councils teach. We're not necessarily bound to what everything that a bishop says, even though there is some things that a bishop could say in some settings that is binding. I mean, you would recognize that as an Orthodox, but I get the distinction here. But if you can afford yourself that distinction, why can't we be afforded distinctions when it comes to assent here? That's the point. If you grant yourself these distinctions, why can't we have them? But yeah, let's talk about LP here, because I have him pulled up here. Here. Do you accept this as an Orthodox? Let's read it together. Are you, or is this where distinction time starts to come in? Are you going to do like us and start to make distinctions, or do you just indiscriminately accept everything that a bishop says? When you elevate one religion above all others, Elpidelphero says, it is as if you decide there is only one path leading to the top of the mountain. But the truth is you simply cannot see the myriads of paths that lead to the same destination because you are surrounded by boulders of prejudice that obscure your view. Yes, he's teaching universalism, and this is not uncommon in Orthodoxy, where they are, quite a few are pushing apokatastasis. And here come all the distinctions from the Orthodox. Here they come with their nuances. We can't have nuances as Catholics. We can't have distinctions. We can't be afforded those, but they have to be given those. They have to be given them. They have to be afforded those. Oh, well, he's not, the universal shepherd. And we don't believe Vatican I papacy applies to Elpidelphoros. And not everything a bishop says is binding. And only an ecumenical council, according to some, is going to be universally binding. And we can be in communion with heretics, or at least we can be in communion with somebody who's in communion with heretics, because that is the case. If you're Orthodox, you're either in communion with this guy directly, or you're in communion with somebody who is in communion with this guy. That's the problem. Either you are going to accept the rapist into your house, or you're just going to basically say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to let you in my house, Mr. Rapist, but my friend's going to let you in. I mean, that's effectively the situation here in Orthodoxy. Either they're in communion with him, or they're in communion with somebody who is. Either way, you ultimately have some kind of communion with this guy, directly or indirectly. You're sharing the one body of Christ, the Eucharist, with somebody who's sharing the Eucharist with this guy at the very least. So that doesn't work for me. Saying, oh, well, it's not the same paradigm, bro, as Jay will say and others. It's not the same paradigm, bro. You just don't understand epistemology, bro. We don't have the same ecclesiology, bro. Irrelevant, because at the end of the day, you either share in the same Eucharist with this guy, or you're in communion with somebody who is sharing communion with this guy, and nobody's doing anything to depose him. Nobody's getting rid of him. I mean, he's still there. He's going to gay churches. Yeah, you heard me right. Went to and celebrated the Divine Liturgy at an Anglican parish, and it wasn't because they didn't have space. No. And go and watch the homily that he delivered there. Right after that, the parish is all about gays and transgenderism and promoting it on their social media. And he goes right back there, right after that. And does it again. You're in communion with this guy, either directly or you're in communion with somebody who is. That's a problem. So let's talk about Orthodox. Let's talk about what they are to assent to. Well, he's going to say, well, I don't have to assent to this stuff. Okay, then why did you not afford us those same distinctions when you just read me something that wasn't magisterial, but you want to say somehow I have to believe it? Somehow it's relevant to me? Because somebody non-magisterially said something that you think lines up with you, even though I ultimately would challenge that, but let's just pretend that it somehow lines up with you. You want to afford yourself these distinctions, but you won't give it to us. It's hypocritical. I'm not buying it. I think this is rhetoric. I think this is Jay desperately trying to win Catholic converts, and he's doing so very poorly. As I said, I can give him better arguments than this.
Indeed, Father Francis Dvornik, the famous Uniate.
Oh, there he goes, Dvornik. Although I didn't know he was a Uniate. I would question that. I've never been able to substantiate that. But even if he is, I don't care. Great. Wonderful. A guy who wants to be in union with Rome? Yeah. That's way better than you schismatic guys out there who don't want to be in union with Rome, who are divided among yourselves. I would 100% accept the title Uniate because of what it means. I mean, so I don't know why he even brings that up as if that's an issue. I think it's an issue, the fact that you're not a Uniate. But putting that issue to the side, Dvornik. I just read Dvornik to you. Dvornik's not on your side. Read the Photian Schism. Dvornik's not on your side. He notes that Photius died in communion with Rome. That serves a lot of problems for you. Because Photius, your saint, goes back into communion with somebody who he blasts as a heretic. And at the end of the day, just says, let Rome's custom be Rome's customs and let our customs be our customs. And, it's cool. We can be a communion. And the very guy was altering documents. But what he doesn't alter are the papal claims, according to Dvornik. So you want to quote Dvornik to me? Why don't you quote that? You know why? Because you're probably looking to score points with people who have never read Dvornik before or even know who he is.
His book, The Photian Schism, has essentially admitted all of the arguments of the East.
We just read from the Photian Schism, and that doesn't bode well for your position. And we can read a whole lot more that doesn't bode well for your position in there. Dvornik is not on your side here.
The Eastern Uniate Roman Catholics revere all of these so-called schismatic and heretical people that the Orthodox Church holds up.
That's not true. We don't revere all of them. There's some that Orthodox revere on their calendars that the Eastern Catholics don't. But I've already addressed this numerous times. I don't have a problem with venerating somebody who is accepted on the Eastern Catholic calendar that is a saint in the Orthodox tradition that wasn't in communion with Rome. I don't have an issue with that, and you have the same problem. You have the same problem because you have people on your calendar that you venerate as Orthodox that are non-Chalcedonians, and you know that. So you have the same problem. I have an answer for it, and I've given the answer many times. Go and watch shows where we talk about this. Go and watch the show where I talk about papal canonizations of saints and whether or not they're infallible. And I also address this very issue here. How can we talk about canonizations, implicit canonizations, if you will, of some of these Eastern Catholic saints? How can we do that? I have ways to reconcile that as a Catholic. I don't have an issue with it. You're going to have an issue because of the argument you just used. You just used that as an argument against Catholicism, but I'm going to throw it right back at you and say, what do you do with the non-Chalcedonians that you venerate? So it's a bad argument.
The Latins, the Roman Catholic Church anathematizes. So that alone tells you that the Roman Catholic Church contains.
And you want to know who I'm talking about? Go and read Hilarion. Here's how you really make an Orthodox upset. Go and read Hilarion's article, which I've done before on the show and reviewed it, I think on 2 different videos. Go and review his article on what is an ecumenical council and whether or not the Oriental Orthodox have to accept the ecumenical councils. Go and read it and pay attention to the non-Chalcedonians that he says is venerated in the Orthodox tradition. Pay attention to that section.
Conflicting, contradictory creeds and confessions.
And by the way, it's online for free. So just type in Hilarion Ecumenical Councils PDF. It'll probably come right up.
For it is not the true church. In fact, wouldn't we expect the true church to use and exemplify the very anathematization ceremony? At least that's
the anathematization ceremony that he's referring to is part of the Byzantine liturgy and the Byzantine tradition. I don't think it was ever part of the Latin Rite. But if he's talking about our Eastern communions, we do have Eastern Catholics who celebrate that and will say the anathemas. Here's something that's really going to sting for you Orthodox who are watching. Guess what? When I was Orthodox, Did our parish sing the anathemas? Nope. They took them out. You know why? To be ecumenical, to not offend others. They took them out. So you'll find Orthodox, not all, but you will find Orthodox who take that out to be ecumenical. And then you'll find Eastern Catholics who are singing the anathemas. So, very bad argument, inconsistent. I don't know why he would even bring this up as an argument against Catholicism. It sounds ludicrous.
Exemplified at the Seventh Council, the anathema service.
He doesn't cite just St. Isaac, Victoria. I see you there in the chat. He cites some others. Look more carefully. Yeah, and so some Orthodox preserve this, just like some Eastern Catholics preserve it. But it's never been part of the Latin tradition to have this particular triumph of orthodoxy ceremony. So I don't know what he's talking about, why this would be somehow a mark of the truth. This was a Byzantine tradition in the East. The West has its own tradition. Yes, we accept the Seventh Ecumenical Council, but the Seventh Ecumenical Council in the West, even though it was us preserving iconography and it was primarily the East fighting against them, the East digested the Seventh Ecumenical Council a little bit differently than we did in the West.
Well, post-Vatican II, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't even do an anathema.
You see what I'm saying? The post-Vatican II church, what is he talking about? When did the Latin tradition ever do this, Jay? Huh? What am I missing? I thought this was part of the Byzantine tradition, which we do in the Eastern Catholic churches, and some of y'all Orthodox don't do today. So this isn't a good argument.
Service. In fact, it doesn't accept the Synodicon and its anathema service. So if you
again, I was pretty sure this was part of the Byzantine tradition and never part of the Roman Rite. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Your church doesn't do what the church of the first millennium, the first 700 years did. You're not the true church.
Wait. Weren't you in communion with Rome at the time of the Seventh Council? Wouldn't you say that you'd be in communion with that Rome at that time? Did it do this in the West? Was this part of the Roman tradition? Were we doing this liturgically then? But you were in communion with us though, right? Even though we weren't doing it, you were still in communion with us, right? So how does this argument work? It sounds inconsistent. It sounds like you're just capitalizing on ignorant people that this is going to score points with, but it's not very consistent and it shoots yourself in the face if you were going to be consistent. But as we've seen right now, his MO is inconsistency anyway. So
the final point, I would add that the post-Vatican II papacy is engaged in progressively more egregious versions of apostasy via their so-called ecumenism.
All right, so now he goes into the whole ecumenism charge and all that. And he's going to completely misdefine ecumenism. Let's talk about that. I got something for you. Let me pull it up. This is a CC 1986, which I've criticized many times. I criticized John Paul II on this. I criticized Benedict XVI for his Assisi. I criticized Pope Francis and his similar version here with Pachamama. I criticize all of this. And I can still be a Catholic and do that. And this isn't a death blow to the papacy any more than it's a death blow to you as an Orthodox. Because pretty much all of these things that he's talking about ecumenism and ceremonies that we're involved in, the Orthodox are there all along. And they'll say, but epistemology, bro, and ecclesiology, bro, it's different, bro. You got to understand, we don't believe Vatican I infallibility, so our bishops can be apostates, bro. But you're in communion with them, right? You're in communion with these heretics and apostates. I just want to get that straight. You are in communion with these guys who are engaging in this ecumenism, or at the very least, you're in communion with people who are in communion with them, right? I see y'all there laughing at the voice in the chat. No, I mean, seriously, that's how they do all the time. It's epistemology, bro. Yeah, well, we could do a whole show on just the idiosyncrasies I've observed there, but we'll put that one to the side. You're either in communion with the guys who are involved in this stuff, or you're in communion with somebody who is in communion with them, right? So in some way, you still share in the same table and altar as these people. Y'all haven't anathematized just all these people who are in communion with these ecumenists, right? Which is the vast majority of world orthodoxy, by the way. And this is why you have this phenomena of basically Orthodox sedevacantism. It's called true orthodoxy. It's where you have Orthodox who, they're the true Orthodox. They're not in communion with what we know as Eastern Orthodoxy, because they recognize that, well, all these guys are involved in this ecumenism and stuff like that. They're involved in all these ecumenical events. Or at least they're in communion with somebody who is in communion, I should say, with these other people who are involved. So what they do is they just say, well, you know what? I can't share in the same altar as these people or be in fellowship with people who are. So I'm going to break communion with them. And we are the true Orthodox. A lot of true Orthodox see this stuff, so they go elsewhere. I have to wonder if this is why Jay Dyer jumped around to different communions in Orthodoxy since he's been Orthodox. What, two years maybe? He's been Orthodox? 2 years or so? And he's already jumped communions. Why is that? I have to wonder. Is it because he's trying to get away from this ecumenism stuff? Okay. Well, is your bishop still in communion with one of the guys that is part of these ecumenical ceremonies? If so, you have a problem. It's only a matter of time. You'll find yourself as a true Orthodox, a sedevacantist Orthodox, basically. You continue to carry this reasoning to its logical conclusion. Let's watch this, though. This is Assisi, 1986. Again, I criticize this all the time. But guess who are present? Let's watch.
And Shintoists. Also present was Elio Toaf, chief rabbi of the Central Synagogue of Rome, which the Pope had visited a few months previously. Christians of almost all confessions were represented. The World Council of Churches, Nestorians, Non-Chalcedonians, Copts, Armenians, Malabarese, Roman Catholics, Old Catholics, Anglicans, Lutherans. Unfortunately, there was also a place at this pan-religious meeting for the Orthodox ecumenists, who indeed played a decisive role in its realization. There were
And were any of them deposed? Did the true Orthodox come out and depose these people? Did the good bishops come out and just anathematize them, get rid of them? Did the synods do anything? Or did they still remain in office and basically the bishops at the time still remain in communion with them? And you might say, well, this is 1986. Yeah, but I can show you the same exact thing in what was it, 2004, where Benedict had his version. The Orthodox came back. Thank you for the super chat, Enrique, by the way. Can you do another Jay Dyer impression, please? The epistemology, bro. I've done it in several videos. It's epistemology, bro. You just don't understand, bro. Yeah. Well, I am pretty sure I understand epistemology, and it doesn't lend itself to Dyer's position. And by the way, it's not me who is poor when it comes to matters of philosophy, as I showed recently with Jay, who made some very fundamental blunders in terminology and philosophy. So I don't know why he pulls that card. But moving on, let's still talk about, okay, you have a CC part 2 recently. You have other events, ecumenical events, where these bishops are still there, represented by most of the Orthodox churches. You still have these events, and they're not deposed. And you're either in communion with them or in communion with somebody who is. So it's just a really bad argument to try to bring up the ecumenism stuff, because look, the Orthodox are right there with us when it comes to this problem. Unfortunately, they haven't really done any better here. And if they are going to maintain the standards of the first millennium, they shouldn't be sharing in the same altar with these guys.
Delegates from the Orthodox churches of Finland and Czechoslovakia, the Patriarchate of Bulgaria,
the Russian church was represented here, by the way. The Metropolitan of Kiev was there.
the Patriarchate of Romania, the Patriarchate of Georgia, the Patriarchate of Moscow, and the Patriarchate of Antioch.
Basically, everybody is indicted in this video, unfortunately. But it's a pox on everyone's house. This is a problem for everybody. I, as a Catholic, have ways to understand it. But if Jay is going to use these arguments, even with his epistemology and his ecclesiology, it's not going to work.
A special place next to the Pope was occupied by Archbishop Runcie, the presiding bishop of the Anglicans, and Archbishop Methodius of Thyatira, the representative of the Patriarchate of Constantinople.
And the Orthodox aren't just hanging out there. Watch the leading role they take.
The churches of Alexandria and Jerusalem declared their spiritual assent with messages.
There you go. Good old Byzantine chants.
The Church of Greece, unfortunately, participated in a prayerful way with a well-known Byzantine choir from Athens, which chanted at the three main presentations at Assisi.
And were any of these people condemned and removed? Were any of them deposed? This is pervasive in Orthodoxy. It really is. Even to this day, this is Assisi, 86, as I said. Still pervasive. Still today. You can even see joint prayer services. It's pervasive. Now, there are some Orthodox who are standing hard against it. Sure. But they're in communion with somebody who is in communion with these people. That's still the problem. And by the way, the recent schism right now in Orthodoxy isn't over stuff like this. It isn't over the fact that Patriarch Bart is involved in services like this. No. The Russians remained in communion with Patriarch Bart while he's engaging in joint prayer services like this, not in 86, but later on, joint prayer services. They don't break communion with him over that. which should tell you something. They break communion over jurisdiction issues in politics. That should also tell you something. All right. Well, I think y'all get the point. There's a lot more that I could share, a lot more that I could show. Problem of ecumenism is pervasive. We all have to deal with it. There's a right way to do ecumenism, and there's a wrong way. And I think Assisi was the wrong way. And I think some of the things that Pope Francis does is the wrong way. Some of the things that Benedict did was the wrong way. I don't buy into it. At the same time, I don't have to break communion with Pope over these issues. If you're going to be consistent and you're going to use these standards, you should break communion with whoever is doing this. And you should also break communion with those who are approving of those who do this. You shouldn't be in communion with them either. This is a problem for everybody, Orthodoxy included. And like I said, before the recent schism between Russia and Constantinople, Moscow and Constantinople, they were in union. Even with all this stuff going on with Patriarch Bart and others, they're still in union. Russia's still in union with ecumenists today, even not being in union right now with Constantinople. Russia is still in communion with ecumenists. And why do I keep mentioning Russia? Because a lot of people are going to try to use Russia as this standard of orthodoxy. And yet, go and read some of the things that the Russians say, number one. And also note how they don't break communion with each other over things like this. So I'll leave y'all with that. I hope y'all enjoyed it. If y'all want me to do more of these, let me know. Like I said, I'm going to start doing this as a regular segment on Tuesdays if y'all like these. If you don't, I'll discontinue it and do something else on Tuesdays. So we'll see. Just let me know your feedbacks there in the chat. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also share this on your social media. And, hit the bell for a notification of future shows. Also check us out, patreon.com/Reason in Theology. To support our show, you'll also get access to extra content. What I'll probably do is another Jay Dyer review that I'm going to put on there for patrons only. So if y'all want to see that, that'll be within the next few days. If y'all want to see it, you'll have to become a patron. All right. Till next time. God bless you all.